Hi everybody, thanks for coming. Can you hear me well back there? All right, awesome. Hope everyone's been having a good time at the conference. Thanks for taking some of your time to share it here with me. So we've got a lot to get over. So this is going to be kind of some of the things that we're going over. It's for Pattern Lab, the definitive how-to. So first, let's go ahead and get into some introductions. Hi everyone, I'm Evan Lovely. I'm the CTO at Basalt, and we are a design system focused agency, and I'm also the Pattern Lab maintainer. I've had my hand in creating several of the tools that you might be using if you've been working with some of these things, most notably some of the Phase 2's Pattern Lab Starter, which helped kind of give a good starting theme for getting all these things going, and then also some Pattern Lab plugins that really help it work well with Drupal, particularly around the Twig namespace area. My Twitter handle is just my name, @EvanLovely, so feel free to shoot me some questions if you'd like, or feel free to stalk away. So anyway, so the thing what's different about how we're doing things these days is it's less and less about the pages that we're building and more about the components. And so you know, the way that these come together as well is about getting them into small pieces to be able to work with them, because they end up being these little Lego blocks that we put together. And so there's definitely a better methodology out there than just creating a bunch of Drupal content types and getting their fields all ready and then having it output the page and then just start styling it to make it look right. A lot of inconsistencies can get introduced this way, because there's a lot of different ways that all these things could come together. And then also, of course, the data model and that particular content type and field is not always going to be the same, nor would you want it to be. It's kind of better to be able to break them down into some isolated components that are kind of ignorant of where their data is coming from. So Pattern Lab is a tool that helps out with that, taking some of these small pieces and then building them on up. This is most popularized by the methodology atomic design, where it's this idea of taking a small thing and putting it into a medium thing into a large thing. So the atoms, molecules, organisms. The analogy kind of stops there, gets to templates and pages, but the idea here is that the smallest pieces, the atoms, the text fields, are going to be put together next to another small piece, a button, which is going to get put in turn, into basically being, the search field, which then kind of grows up to being the site navigation there. And this is a methodology. Atomic design is a methodology, and Pattern Lab is a tool. So they work well together, but one is not required by the other. So you can really name those folders in there whatever you'd like: atoms, molecules, organisms, or you can base, components, layouts, whatever really works well for you. But nonetheless, being able to break things apart and then use them together, and then being able to take a look at them at a couple different levels really, really helps out. So what is Pattern Lab? So Pattern Lab, besides being just a static site generator, is a style guide, a component library, and a prototyping tool. So let's talk through some of these different pieces here. So, your style guide is something that basically lets you see a lot of kind of the very small pieces, the little design decisions, like the design tokens, what is the primary color? What is, the fonts and their variations, and those are kind of the more you can't really go to a page and be like, right there is the color. I mean, it's the color that's applied to the text or the border or something like that. Whereas once you kind of get into the atoms area a little bit, you can point towards that, a button in H2. So, these are the kind of real low-level pieces. And these are what kind of classically had made their way in as a style guide too, like the print style guides that are, great coffee table books that basically outline how you'd be kind of doing some of these pieces. And they also can kind of start to build up a little bit of some things that don't really fit well into kind of a atoms, molecules, organisms model of the Russian nesting dolls, really, where you can basically start to be taking a look at like utilities and grids for some people, and that's kind of again why some people will do components and layouts, because where a grid fits in with organisms is it's really sort of a grid of cards is what the organism is. So nonetheless, being able to have some of the individual elements in the style guide is one element. The component library. So basically it's a collection of UI components. So this is your molecules and organisms, and there's a very fierce debate about where that line is between molecules and organisms, and I'm going to just go ahead and stop you right there, as I don't have the answer. I would say basically like what defines one from the other is going to be different. And what probably would be important is having some good litmus tests that your team knows. It's more about being consistent there. And so this is also, again, why we see some people who would just be like, well, let's just call them components, because what we have here in this area is these are templates that you would include, and air quotes more should be like the backticks if I'm thinking markdown. So it should be include with a twig and then pass in some data, which we're going to get into a little bit. But these are just hunks of UI that you'd be able to use that you could pass data to, because you have a template plus data equals the rendered HTML. And so, yeah, there's some great examples right there: cards, media blocks, menus, grids of media blocks. So then we get into the prototyping tool, and so this is basically, what all this stuff looks like together. And so for all the talk of we're building components, we're not building pages, well, we're still shipping pages, and that's how end users are still experiencing this site. And so, if you go and take a look at each of these things in isolation, you go really close to a button, you make a perfect button, you have a very flexible grid, you got a great icon library, and then heroes and cards and all that thing like that. It just looks like crap when you put it all together. It's not that great. So the idea is you want to be able to, what does it look like all together? Because design is so much more than just it looking good. It's about how it all works together. And so this gives you an idea of what it would look like. Chances are also stakeholders are probably interested in what their final product is going to look like. So show me that homepage. I want to be able to see it. And so the atomic design classic definition of like templates and pages would be basically that templates would have the dummy data and pages would have real actual data. But both of these are pretty much full pages. And so the thing that's really nice about Pattern Lab here is you can be able to take a look at what this would look like without having to do a lot of the overhead of everything needed with Drupal, getting the database going, getting all the content types configured, and local environment stuff, all the fun that's around Docker, just to be able to give your template some dummy data to see what it would look like. And so this is a great place to be able to see what it's like to compose all those components. So, word of warning is I would not advise having like a full template or full page that is big. This is the blog post full page and then including that in Drupal. I would not advise that at all. It seems nice, but it's not. So this is more of like a recipe of basically how those smaller pieces of the component library could be put together. And again, these are just like theories. The tool will let you do that. So if you want to, have at it. These are some of the hallmarks of Pattern Lab of what it lets you do, being able to get your style guide and then the individual pieces of the component library, and then seeing what this could look like all together. And so the advantage here, well, actually, let me take a step back. So your back-end users here, don't take this the wrong way, but the biggest blocker for front-end development can be back-end development. And what I mean by that is that if you want to be able to style something and make it look like the comp, you need HTML, right? There's no way around it. You can write all the CSS you'd like, but if you don't have something to apply it to, it's not going to work at all. And so what has traditionally happened is what, like I just mentioned there, like, okay, well, let's go ahead and make the content type, let's get all the fields there, maybe these are paragraphs, whatever, and then now they're on the page, we have just a bunch of ugly HTML, now we have the HTML, now we can actually start styling it. And then what inevitably happens is the backend dev says to the front end dev, does it look good? Oh, that looks good. And then they get working on it, and they're like, actually, could this div be like up here? You know, and I mean, obviously there's some templating that's totally possible, but there are things that can fundamentally change the data model. And so what is a better way of doing this is being able to parallelize this, because if you can get it so the front-end developer can make their own markup, and then be able to start styling that frees these things up to run in parallel. And so, you know, what you can be able to do here is, one, you could just like, all right, I've got some markup I can get on the page. Like, you can be rolling on day one where they're still debating whether we should be using like a bigger box or Docker. And this also really helps out backend development, because backend development had been a lot about basically, all right, here's our data model and how it's all put together, and then now let's go ahead and output it in this markup. And what it becomes is all of that stuff I said before, but instead of putting out in markup, it is about structured data and then passing that in, which is, I find most backend developers are like, yes, thank you. Here's your data. Like, go ahead and pull it on in there. Like, you wrap it in whatever you want. And that's probably what the front-end developer wants as well. They're just like, okay, I've got these variables to work with. Like, what's an entity reference? I don't know. I don't care. And that's great. So it works out good and works out well for both. Additionally, this makes the iteration cycles easier and quicker feedback. So you get into a scenario where you can, a designer can come up with an idea of what a hero could look like in Sketch on Monday, and then be able to do a handoff to front-end developer later on Tuesday morning, and then the front-end developer works on that for a couple days, and maybe the final design polish isn't there, but they can get it in a browser, which is the medium it's destined for, and that medium is unique. It can resize, and you can resize Photoshop, you're not going to get the exact same results. And so what happens when it looks like when it's smaller? What happens when the title is 3 times as long? You can get some of that feedback to the designer really early, and so it doesn't have to get integrated into the content types. It doesn't have to even have need a full page. You can be able to take a look at just that one piece there. Oftentimes designers don't actually see where their art landed until basically like a couple weeks before launch. And then they're like, oh wait, that's how that works? And there's so many nuances that are so hard to express. Animation, for example, how something feels, how something like responds, especially with all the variables of browser width and content. So this works better, and you can totally know that by these hard scientific facts that have been proven here. And so it's something that you just kind of know it works a little bit better. And so, I mean, there's definitely, if anyone does have some hard stats on like return on investment, like we literally made the website 2 times as faster, I will buy you a beer for that case study. So please come meet me afterwards, and I'd love to be able to get some of that piece there. One reason why those stats are really hard to find out is that you don't know the pains that you didn't have. So unless you want to make the same site twice, one efficiently and one inefficiently, I also don't know any stakeholder who would pay for that. So anyway, there's a bit of the introductions. So let's get into some of the core concepts about what makes a lot of these, or what is necessary to be able to kind of work with a lot of this. So the first part to really have your head around would be Twig namespaces. And so, show of hands, who knows what Twig namespaces are? Anybody? Yes. Has anyone in a Twig file ever written @ and then path to a Twig file? Those are Twig namespaces. Okay, so the question here is like, how does the system find these files? And everything that uses Twig, a Twig environment, whether it's Drupal or Pattern Lab or whatever, it has kind of a root. And so, by the way, Drupal's is the doc root. And so that's how it's going to be able to find these files. That's how you can kind of use these first ones that have nothing at the beginning because it comes from that doc root. But this last one is really what you want, because what that is it's just a variable. So at path. And so what you want to be able to do is line these up. And so if at path means the same thing to Drupal and to Pattern Lab, then you can use them together. So I guess these are the, should have gone to the next slide a little early, but these are the kind of the defaults of, for Pattern Lab. And so all of the folders right inside the patterns folder, get that little number stripped off, and then you can just use at, and then get right to it. So, literally if I just put something after organisms and was just like, just called it hi, I could use at hi / whatever Twig to be able to get to it. And so Drupal it automatically registers the theme name as its Twig namespace. Actually, more specifically, theme name / templates. So it's the theme name is the Twig namespace, which would get you to the theme directory / templates. Same thing with all of the modules as well. So each of those have those automatically registered. Obviously, they are not aligned, and so what you need to be able to do is teach one about the other. This is most often done by the component library Drupal module, and is configured in the theme name.info.yaml file. So what you're doing is basically just saying, hey, when I say at molecules, I mean this directory right here. And so this is kind of this is the pivotal piece right here. And so because when you're taking these files and you're like, hey, I got a card that includes a button, you're sending that same Twig file down two different rendering pipelines, and so you want to keep those aligned as much as possible. And the big part right there is the Twig namespaces, so you can find the files. Any questions? Oh, nice, it's so clear. Good. So the next part that's super important to be able to understand is passing data. And so the data structure is so different between Pattern Lab and Drupal, but I would even say that it's actually it's not just Pattern Lab versus Drupal. I mean, if something is a paragraph versus a node versus a block versus a views row, those are all different as well. The variable isn't title in block, it's label. And so you need to be able to work with passing data and kind of remapping it. So here's world's most simple design system. We have our nice component a.twig, and it is being used in b and c.twig. And so the include with part. Okay, so we have our include, which finds the file, a.twig. I am not good, I did not use the Twig namespace. I'm not taking my own advice, I'm sorry. But then you do with, and then that passes that data in. If you were to do just include, and then that's it, everything, all the data would have just leaked in, which is just generally, in my opinion, kind of very bad. It's kind of just like, it just magically appears. And so if you pass in the with, it is not only more clear what's going in there, but you have the chance to kind of remap it. So here in c.twig, title becomes label. So this is where you're able to, basically pass it in the way that it's looking for. So there we go. Also, this works with extends and embeds as well. Includes are my favorite. I could get into reasons why, I used to love embed, but now I don't. Gets into kind of grandchild references. So anyway, big fan of include, and then the with. I guess last part is the only. So without the only, data that's global can leak in. And so what would happen in c.twig without only is that the a.twig would get the variable title and label, whereas with the only, it just comes in with title. And so again, this is kind of basic encapsulation, modularity, and things like that, all those really important principles. This is the encapsulation. It's basically okay, very important about I know that this is an isolated set of data scope, basically. So another really important part to understand is this idea of presentational components. So there are basically different types of components, presentational and container. And so these don't differ in function, they're just Twig files used in a certain way, but they differ in their purpose. And so the difference between presentational and container components. So presentational components are concerned with how things look. Container components are concerned with how things work. Presentational has the vast majority of HTML. Container has little to no HTML. Presentational components are styled with CSS. Containers components are not styled with CSS. The presentational component has minimal logic, only using if and for. It allows flexible variations, and it doesn't know or care where its data came from. So this allows a lot of encapsulation, and also may use some other presentational components. Definitely prefers serializable data as well. And some good examples would be the card, media block, and pull quote. So the container components, its job is to provide data to the presentational components. And it actually doesn't know or care how that data is presented either. And so some of these examples are, the things that any themer would be very familiar with, involving like all of the template files around paragraphs, node, block, etc. And so this is an important part, and it helps to have these separated. And again, since this isn't a technical difference, but a conceptual in its use, I advise separate folders. So, but anyway, so here's an idea of kind of like how these would get used. So the one in the center is the only presentational component present. Every other one is the container components. So usually the slides or the screen isn't this awesome. So I have this next one where it zooms in a little bit, but big kudos to the organizers here, because that screen's great. So anyway, what we have here again is the card. We're kind of taking a closer look here. And you can see basically like how over on the left, this card, this is very clean. This is it's exactly what a front-end developer loves. It's just straightforward. It's like, hey, is this variable here? Then some markup, and let's go ahead and use it. It's very, very straightforward. And so, it's agnostic. Nowhere in there do you see blog teaser or any of the hundreds of class names that Drupal will give you. And we're using them here, not necessary, but highly recommended for some of the encapsulation. We talk a lot about design systems, about, you can just power all these different sites that you have, but really one of the first big advantages is just powering all these data models from the same place. So, if you have basically something that started out as it's the blog teaser, and people like it so much they want it to be the event promo or something like that, and then later turned into a paragraph. What typically would happen is in your SAS there'd just be a lot of commas, a lot of selectors, and that kind of worked. But with here, node and block and paragraph, they have very different data models. I kind of mentioned earlier, you can see that block has label as kind of its title there. And so being able to pass these pieces in really helps out a lot. And I mean, maybe you don't want to use your card in all those places, but maybe when it first started, it was a views row, and then later it became, a node display type, and then later they wanted it to be a block, and then finally they're like, paragraphs are great. And so being able to kind of move through those things really helps out. So, when this is used in Pattern Lab, this is kind of what we do a lot. So Pattern Lab has the ability to have these, you can have button.twig and then button.json right next to it, and then just pass in these different hunks of data, JSON or YAML. There's a couple of tricks with some tilde to be able to throw variations, but what we kind of like is actually just more Twig files where you include your first one and pass it on in. And the thing that's great here is that, Pattern Lab excels really at a lot of having dummy data, a lot of global dummy data like headline.short hanging around. And so that makes these dummy data, being able to use it, a lot easier to be able to kind of put these together. And you can also do some fun things like randomly grabbing different kinds of data to pass in to kind of try to break your designs as well. So there we go. That's basically kind of a breakdown of the presentational container components. Does anyone have any questions? Shoot.
So if Drupal's not actually, your previous slide, you actually had all of these, basically the Drupal implementation versus the implementation of Pattern Lab. If Drupal isn't even going to be using the Pattern Lab implementation of, say, the one source of truth card, why even have them if Drupal's not using them? So Drupal's not you pulling in card with image.twig.
Correct.
Everything in Drupal is putting to that same
Correct.
card.
Yes.
So how do you enforce consistency on this is what card with image or dark card? How do you enforce that consistency on the Drupal side of things?
So with a lot of design systems, I think that there's kind of a slider between, do you have a very restrictive system where, designers up on, or actually like the people watching the brand up on the ivory tower are like, no, this is a very, like, you don't get to really mess with it. Either you use it like this, very kind of strict rules there. So in a case like that, you'd have a different scenario than, say, if the plan for the design system is to create a lot of flexible tools to let the boots on the ground and make a lot of calls and not get in their way. So making that call pretty early on is pretty important. So if you were making the call where you're like, I want a very flexible system, I want to make sure that these are just a bunch of utilities that our people can use to put things together, then you wouldn't do that. You'd be like, all right, this serves as an example of how they could come together, kind of like recipes. Now, if you did have something that was basically like, okay, these are kind of defined presets, you simply could basically have these ready to be included. And so, you still have your presentational component, and then you'd include it, pass in the certain things that are kind of like set, like, all right, this is going to be definitely is dark true, but we'll accept just a couple other variables like title and body and things like that. So kind of that concept of presets a little bit. Again, I think it does help to make that call early on. Are we building a flexible toolkit, or is this basically like the codified brand guidelines? Okay. So let's get into a few technical tips. All right, we've got basically a lot of these top-level template variables, and so now this is pretty similar whether you're in a paragraph template type or node or block. And so you know how there's usually content as a variable, and then also paragraph as a variable, or node, or block. And so these basically have two different parts. And so content dot and all those things in there are going to output all of these fun class names that you may or may not be interested in. And once you get down into like basically paragraph dot or node dot or block dot, you're going to get more raw data, which is what we're interested in. And so, the content dot is going to be tapping into like your display modes and what you have set up there. And so, whereas the paragraph part, you're going to be able to get right into a little bit more. Please note the dot value at the tail end. So, for the most part, it is going to just be, paragraph or node, whatever, and then the machine name of the field, dot value, for a lot of kind of your pretty plain or simple field types. Obviously, there's some more complicated ones, like entities. And so, if the field is an entity reference, you can just do dot entity, and then you're basically there in it. So this is kind of a structure that I would usually do, is say there is a field that referenced a venue, and then that has, some other information on it. Setting it up like this kind of starts to feel pretty straightforward. By the time I'm setting venue city and venue state, it feels kind of like I was accessing data in the previous one. So another one that is always challenging to be able to kind of get into is accessing images. And so, it's kind of wild because most of the Twig variables that are there are really actually just like PHP classes that are instantiated. And it's we'll get into it a little bit, but there's things you can access and things you can't, and then there's like getter functions. One thing I wish about Drupal is by the time it made it a template, it was all serializable data. But nonetheless, you still have access to get file URI, for example, and so you can see the result there. And then you could be able to use the file URL function that is right in Drupal and be able to get right to it. But you're probably going to want something that has gone through an image style. So I'm a big fan of the Twig Drupal module, where you're able to basically first get that image up on that top line, or line 1, and then be able to get the small one down on line 8. This can be quite nice because this makes it easy to grab a small image, medium image, large image that way before you kind of start passing them in. Finding information out. So poor man's debugger. I've probably used this more often than I'd like to admit, but it works out pretty good. So the underscore context is just every global variable that is available to that current Twig template. And so, if you were curious about what was in the paragraph variable, you could replace underscore context with that. And so these for loops, it's the key value, it's looping over an object, and so you'll note that I'm not printing out the value. So anybody know what would happen if I did print out the value with an underscore context? Okay, yeah, you know. So you would, like I mentioned earlier, these are all the things that pass to Twig are not for Twig. And so you are accessing right on to like full PHP classes with some private methods. If you fire that, you're going to get an exception and a white screen of death. Once you get in a little bit further, you can be able to drop that value piece in there, but you're always going to be able to print the key. Always. And so, and it gets interesting there too because it's skipping the public methods, which are the getter methods, which are probably the way that you want to be able to get things in. And at one point you're going to kind of want to upgrade your tools to Xdebug, but this is a quick snippet, and it kind of helps out, to be like kind of all right, where am I at? And then sometimes you just need to see your keys and be like, oh, okay, all right, I can kind of dive in a little bit further here. This is kind of how I like to set up a lot of my initial Twig templates in Drupal. And so I basically like the idea of having kind of just like a big set data. So, down here at the bottom underneath all this stuff, I would include my card and then pass in, and set my title to data.title if it was up there. But the thing is that for like a little bit, most of it is like plucking my data out, right? And so being able to I build this set data up, and then I got my poor man's debugger, and you'll note that since I'm actually iterating over data, and all of that stuff in data is serializable data, I actually can print out the value. So starting things out like this, be able to kind of build it on up before passing it into that next file. This also is a good gut check because, if something's going wrong, is it down in that presentational card component, or is it up here in the container component, or did we never get something from the model, basically? This is kind of a nice way to be able to take a look at things. So another good tip here is basically making a design system as a theme dependency. So I had mentioned earlier about how we have Twig namespaces and how you're like, all right, let's just go ahead and tell Drupal that molecules is in the theme directory /Pattern Lab /source patterns all the way down there. Well, npm install is just like a fancy FTP to download stuff to get ignored folder. A little more than that, but nonetheless, it is just a folder there, and so you can say, hey, to find components, it's in node modules /my components. And so that works out. And then you actually don't even have to publish this on NPM. So that syntax up there in place of the version in package.json can just let you hit a git repo directly. And then that last little part with the semver is kind of like looking at the tags. You could replace semver : 1.2.3 with master or develop, or anything that you could run git checkout on as well. So it's a nice way to be able to kind of get these things starting to get separated a little bit, which kind of paves the way towards, hey, I want to use this in a couple different sites, and also sets good foundations for, help. My front-end developers are scared of Drupal. Let's put it over here. And I mean, jokes aside, that also can really help out with basically like hiring good talent and contractors, people who are damn good at what they do around, implementing design in a thoughtful way, catering to animations and responsive behaviors, and having focused as much of their career on content types and drush. So anyway, there's a few tips, and then I want to talk about what's next for Pattern Lab and a little bit of the ecosystem. So, overview of the ecosystem. So, Pattern Lab's got starter kits, which are basically your initial kind of hack and slash files, if you will. So this is basically going to kind of spin you up with all the examples. Style guide kit is now called UI kit, but is basically, the Chrome. So it's the menu up at the top and the little resizer and all those little options. And then you have the engine, which is basically that thing that's like, all right, it's like Twig or Mustache. And so it's like, all right, give you a template file and data, give you back some HTML, and then of course core, which basically is, running all of those little pieces and coordinating them together. So that collectively is referred to as a Pattern Lab edition. So the thing that's a little crazy is that it's been kind of like this for a while. It's kind of a wild story of basically like how all this came together. And Pattern Lab at the very beginning was just a single PHP project and repo. It wasn't even broken apart like that. It had been growing for some time, and then open source stuff. It's not your full-time job, hard to be able to kind of keep up. And at some point, another person came in along and was like, well, I want to be able to help, but what's PHP? So it started going on Node.js and being able to put some stuff together there, which is probably, frankly, better suited for a lot of this stuff. However, the thing, that we're all here for, we're with Drupal a lot, and Twig, and I hear you about Twig.js, but it's just different enough to like not let me sleep well at night if I'm basically helping to build like a very large corporate site that, if this launches and doesn't work, I'm going to get fired. So, when it comes down to like something like this where you are being like, hey, look at your, entire design that's been implemented in the browser, you want to get that right. If it's going to like, oh yeah, we've been working in Pattern Lab for a while, okay, let's send it down Drupal's side. So having the Twig PHP engine is very important. However, the rest isn't. And so basically like what's kind of happening is we're moving to, have moved over to this, where the core is a JavaScript core, because that's something like, all right, find the files that are in here, and let's loop through them, and let's grab your dummy data, let's pass it to an engine, which is still Twig PHP. It's the only part of this that's PHP. It's basically like, hey, here's a template file, here's the data, give me back some HTML. Then it's back to basically just like a pure JS core of, writing that file to the file system and using your plugins to do some different things and showing how this can look. The big thing that really, really helps this all out is basically just, being able to, because before here, like, how that got coordinated together is a markdown spec. There's a lot of ways that can go wrong. So there were features that were in one that weren't in others. There were config variables that, sometimes had a space, sometimes didn't, or were called things different, so documentation was really hard. So moving over to this situation where we've got a core, a JS core, but can handle multiple engines, is where we're at right now. And this is a pretty new scenario here. So this is, getting the Twig PHP engine merged into Pattern Lab Node probably about 3 months ago. There's a lot of work that had gone into this stuff, and special thanks there, Mr. Salem Gowrie. Thank you very much for a lot of your help with this stuff. And there's a lot of people here who have come together to be able to help that stuff out. It's also now in a monorepo at that I'm sure you all know how to use GitHub. And if you don't, then don't worry about monorepos because you have bigger problems. So it's easier than ever to be able to get using and get contributing. The whole project would definitely love some hands in on it. So if you're curious, head to that repo, follow README and get moving. So a monorepo, basically, it's just one GitHub repo you clone, and then it has all the little packages. Don't worry about how that all gets up on NPM, but it basically gives you a place to be able all right, here's a pattern lab, and I can kind of hack and slash on the source code and make it a little bit better. Also, how to get started with this stuff. So this used to be a little bit more laborious, and okay, first do this, do that, pull this over here, rename that, run that, a lot of those kind of things, and it has been whittled down to that. So if you have NPM, that's the only prerequisite. You could just run that, and then that's gonna, make a new directory and grab all the files to be able to get started. I think you might have to run npm install after that, but that is in the README. So being able to kind of get going with that, it's going to ask you some questions if you want Mustache.js or Twig PHP, things like that. Pick the Twig PHP one because it's the best. That is how to get started. It's pretty cool. It's good stuff. Being able to kind of, in this age of microservices, modularity, decoupling things, it does kind of seem foolish to look back to be why did I have to make a database, several content types, lots of fields, just to put a border and a shadow around a card, be able to kind of see how that felt. So being able to have those things decoupled is a much better workflow. It's great to be able to kind of see all of the different variations, because it's not about, can I see it in a browser, but, if you're working on this in Drupal, okay, see in a browser, let's go hit edit, let's go ahead and change small to medium, let's hit save, let's go take a look at it again, okay, it's looking good, all right, let's go ahead and hit edit, let's move the image to the left, hit save, go back, okay, everything's looking good. Unbeknownst to you, you did not do image on the left and small, and that was your bug. But you basically, if you think about it, if you have a size small, medium, large, and it is dark, image is one of all four directions. That's whatever 3 times 4 times 2 is of permutations. And so where with Pattern Lab, you could just see just a huge page of every possibility of your card. And meanwhile, you're banging on your keyboard on some styles, and every time you hit save, the whole thing is refreshing. Since you're not dealing with a database, your coworker, or when it gets deployed, it's consistent. And so that really helps out a lot. This also opens up the possibility of being able to test it. So, if you have every permutation that's viewable at a consistent URL, well, what happens when we fire some accessibility testing at that? To make sure that it's, able to be used by people who don't have faculties around, and that's a nicety for some, it's a high priority for others, and it's a straight requirement for some. And being able to test it at one spot, where you're hey, let's get our card right, versus being able to go, all right, let's go ahead and check out the entire site. We have 50 errors, and it's all the card. So it's a bad signal to noise ratio challenge. And so there becomes a lot of really cool, interesting things that once you be able to, isolate these things down. I mentioned earlier about how it can get used in several different data models, like the paragraph and node and block and things like that, but can also start to get used in other sites and other things that aren't Drupal. So there's a lot of cool things that become possible with this. Be able to speed up your feedback cycles, be able to kind of let the designers know what this is going to look like in the meeting that it's destined for, without having to build everything first. And then backend developers don't have to worry about the markup and how they want it, and you don't have to change around your data model just because the way that CSS stacks things threw that off. So backend developers can focus a lot more on data management and getting that stuff in there. So there's a lot more kind of clean handoff lines as well. So a lot of great things come from this one. Something I'm really excited about. thank you very much. Appreciate everybody taking your time. So, yeah, once again, my name is Evan Lovely. I'm CTO at Basalt. You can find some more info at basalt.io. And then there is the link to that GitHub repo that I had mentioned. So, once again, thanks everybody for sharing your time with me. I appreciate it, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Oh, sorry, any questions? Yeah, that. Yeah, come on, the microphone, if you could, so like anyone recording from here. Nice Portland shirt.
First, thank you very much for your work on this for other contributors in the room. Great tool. I know that in the Node version, if I'm not mistaken, like you used to be able to use the like a tilde with your YAML, your JSON, to be able to create those variants.
Yep.
I like the way you got it set up for having a container, and then the presenter. So you can still have those variants in Pattern Lab. I was wondering if there was any, plans to kind of bring that back into the Node version, or is it something that...
Yeah, so I'm not as familiar with the current state there as far as like that being kind of like an open bug piece. I mean, PR is welcome, and for sure. And as far as kind of a use case, that method has kind of really taken over. So there is several advantages. I mean, instead of like pasting in your 2 sentences of lorem ipsum, you can have it in global data and pass it down. But you know how if you include one pattern in another pattern, its local data doesn't come along? Well, if you were to include one of those examples there, it would come along. And so once you get to the prototyping phase, and you actually can start including those the container components that were demoing the card, and then not have to, it's a lot less overhead of setting up the data. So if you kind of do that traditional approach, by the time you get to templates and pages, the local data for it is usually over 1,000 lines. Has anyone ever had to deal with that at all, where basically by the time you get up there, you have a mountain of data? So that's one thing that's, way better in our opinion. So, it's not as much incentive to fix it, but I think that it's something that should either get fixed or basically just full on deprecated.
Either way, the documentation, no matter what.
What's that?
Either way, it needs to get documented, if deprecating it or fixing it.
Thank you. You're welcome. Any other questions? All right. Well, if anyone has anything that they'd like to talk about afterwards, I'm here. Always love to chat about this stuff. Once again, thank you everybody. Enjoy your time.